Are you recording this whole thing?
Yeah. No more music. Excuse me, John.
Yep. Okay.
Can I guess you here?
Sit on his lap.
That was great. That's great.
Okay, so what are we gonna intro like?
Are we have a name of our podcast? This is the Untitled Historical Podcast.
No.
Sure, yeah.
Will's right out there.
Well, we film in a black and white room.
Will's right out there. You can invite
Yeah,
him.
actually, that's a good intro. Do that.
You probably should tilt the camera a little more towards it.
No, we don't need you. Wait, who is it? Let's cut out. Oh, it's you.
Wait, you're gonna crop me out?
No, because it's just it's Reginald Arnold Green. I am proprietor of the Union Pacific Railroad Company.
Howdy, y'all. This is our historical Untitled Podcast.
Are we actually doing that?
My name.
We're not.
Are we actually?
No.
Can I at least have the accent?
No.
You put that on.
Hola, amigos. Soy Jesus.
Soy
Jesus. Mi nombre es Jesus. Este es Ethan. Este es John. This is our Untitled Historical Podcast.
Podcasta.
We're not doing
Podcasta.
this.
Podcasta. Alright, no, for real.
Alright, bro. Lock
For
in.
real.
Hello, everyone.
Shut up, bro.
My name is Jesse Walkup.
No, start over.
Okay, let's redo it. Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Walkup.
I'm Ethan Fabric.
I'm John.
And this is our Untitled Historical Podcast. So, what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, today I will be talking about labor unions and big businesses.
I will be talking about how Mexican immigrants were affected by... Oh, fuck. Where's my thesis?
You can cut that out, right?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Wait, guys. We'll cut me out real quick.
Yeah, start back from like.
Are you introducing your your thesis?
Right now?
Yeah, what are you saying right now?
I'm just saying what we're doing.
I'm gonna say my thesis.
Are you okay? We're doing actual theses?
Yeah, because to make time.
Oh,
This
okay.
only needs to be 10 minutes.
Okay, then I'll do that.
Let's like try to do each like era in one take.
Okay.
And we'll start with you again.
Alright, just go from your thesis. I'm going to talk
This
about...
order.
Well, I'll be talking about labor unions and big businesses. Labor unions and big businesses throughout the 20th century to the present have faced both ups and downs. Policies and acts are passed that sometimes give businesses funding and land to work on while the act is still in effect. When acts are passed that support businesses and the economy sees a rise, what the fuck did I write?
You wrote a lot. I wrote like 3
Yeah.
sentences.
I wrote this much.
Hold on, let me read this actually. What the fuck did I write? Yep.
Should I start then?
Yeah, you just go first.
Okay. I'm going to be talking about Asian Americans. Asian Americans went through extreme acts of discrimination from the Gilded Age up until the Cold War, and only then did policies go into effect to reverse the effect of the long-term discrimination. Though there's been progress in ridding the U.S. of racism towards Asian Americans, there are areas uncovered by policies, and patterns have continued in the modern day with large scares leading to discrimination.
I'm going to be talking about Mexican and Mexican immigrant Americans and how they've been the target for immigration and labor laws over the last century. However, they also have helped shape the U.S. political system and influence national debates over immigration, labor, and equality.
I'll be talking about labor unions and big businesses and how they influence both each other and the economy, and how throughout the 20th century to the present that both the government influences on businesses also in turn affect labor unions, and how labor union strikes and boycotts then affect big businesses.
We should all define our group that we're focusing on. I'm focusing on immigrants between the United States and Mexico for Mexican immigrants.
Well, there isn't. Waiting on you.
But I'm not saying anything.
Okay.
Go from what you were saying.
There isn't an easy way to define Asian Americans. Asia encompasses too many cultures to generalize under the term Asian American. The government defines Asian as coming from the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, which doesn't include Central Asia, which most people would say is Asia. For the purposes of the podcast, I'll be focusing on mostly the government-defined groups, but there is some policies that have affected even Central Asians.
Well, I'll be focusing on labor unions and big businesses, which in itself is pretty explanatory. Labor unions, the coalition of workers united, and big businesses, mainly trusts and monopolies.
Do I say my part? Can you do it? No. Okay. And then, what was your guys' status? What was the status of your group's social, economic, and political rights and positioning at the beginning of the 20th century after the Civil War?
Well, at the beginning of the 20th century, there wasn't much discrimination against Asian Americans, but specifically instead towards Chinese immigrants. This was due to their increased immigration because of the gold rush, which led to other jobs in agriculture, industrial clothes making, and railroad construction. This led to dissent from the other workers. Going further back, this period of time saw the downfall of the Qing dynasty, which was filled with rebellions, disaster, and conflict with Western and neighboring Asian powers, which could have been a reason why specifically Chinese immigrants were common in this era.
My group was primarily just used as recruitment for labor and held the status of a marginalized community.
Well, labor unions and big businesses at the start of the 20th century, specifically labor unions, faced severe backlash, often didn't have government support, and the courts often sided against them, and in some cases they were even deemed illegal. There were internal conflicts inside unions that were legal, though, as many people argue that best action to lead to the best outcome was. Businesses, on the other hand, thrived economically with the use of trusts and monopolies, though they did face social and political hardships as workers demanded better working conditions and for labor unions. The government, while often siding with big businesses, did see or do some progressive reforms, such as counter-lobbying.
Alright, so let's all choose one policy or a major movement or event or convention from each time period, the below. I'm not going to say that part. From the industrialization and Gilded Era between 1870 and 1910.
I'll start. The Chinese Exclusion Act was an act that banned immigration of Chinese laborers into the U.S., and it heavily limited the immigration of those who still sought entry, for example, diplomats, for 10 years. The Geary Act extended the Chinese Exclusion Act for 10 more years and added more restrictions. And in 1902, it was extended indefinitely, and added to it were the regions of Hawaii and the Philippines. This was the first major instance of policy directly outing Asians or Asian immigrants. And this connects to my thesis because this set the idea that Chinese people weren't welcome in the US. It supported the idea that they were stealing jobs from existing laborers, and it became widespread discrimination against more Asians with the immigrant.
Little businessman.
You are a big businessman.
I actually am. My grandpa owns lots of oil wells.
Alley-oop is gonna come at like the start of my explanation, alright? I'm gonna say
he's
like,
gonna throw you a little bone.
yeah.
And you're
It's
gonna
like,
take it.
the Immigration Act of 1917,
I did like though.
limited immigration widely, but specifically for Asian immigrants. It created the.
Okay. You ready?
Introduce.
Alright, what about the Progressive Era between the periods of 1890 and 1920s?
Well, I'll be talking about the Immigration Act of 1917. The Immigration Act of 1917 widely restricted immigration for many cultures, but specifically for Asians, it created the Asiatic Barred Zone, where no immigration was allowed from except for Japanese and Filipino people. This spanned from the Middle East to Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and it spanned up to Central Asia. And it was defined not by borders, but a set of parallels and meridians. This formalized the discrimination of nearly all of the Asian continent, and it further expanded the precedent established by the Chinese Exclusion Act into the rest of Asia, and by the language defining aliens in the wording of the act, it's clear that it served to show that Asians were not welcome or respected in the United States.
I'm also talking about the Immigration Act of 1917, but how it affected Mexican immigrants. So like you said, that's when the immigration restrictions came in by introducing the literacy tests and other barriers from immigrants entering the United States. And while the United States still heavily relied on Mexican immigrants for labor, the law is an example of targeted immigration policies put in place to control immigrants. The government tried to balance The government tried to balance economic dependence on Mexican workers with public fears about immigration, creating contradictions in immigration policies.
Well, I'll be talking about the Clayton Antitrust Act. This was passed by Woodrow Wilson, and it was aimed to break down trusts and monopolies, as well as maintain a fair market competition. This act limited the power that big businesses had, and it banned competitive mergers and price discrimination, removing unfair practices that were used by big businesses, and it helped labor unions by making strikes, boycotts, and unions legal under federal law.
John, what are some pros and cons of this era?
Well, there's just one big con, and it's that this enforced discrimination against almost all Asians. If you were maybe on the borders of this zone, you might be able to get access, but still, this discriminated against all Asians and really even the Asian continent as a whole.
Yeah, from Mexican immigrants, this spiked the amount of discrimination against people because of the fear mongering that's put around migration. You know, there's higher federal control over immigration, and yeah. However, there were still more labor opportunities for immigrants.
Well, for me, the pros and cons pretty much flipped, as this is a very progressive act that was passed.
Immigration Act of 1917, which is the next era.
Alright, I'm going to talk about the expansion of Mexican labor migration. So, between the 1880s and 1910, the big U.S. industries recruited Mexican workers for railroad mining, and agriculture during the industrial growth. Basically, what this meant is that they brought more Mexicans to immigrate through the United States border, but also raised the likeliness for exploitation and discrimination. They became a high labor source, especially for high demanding but low paying jobs. And while Mexican immigrants were the main group leading the labor that brought major railroad systems into the United States, they still faced discrimination against the U.S. political system, which grew the conversation on labor and immigration laws.
Well, for labor unions and big businesses, the Pacific Railroad Act was an act that was passed that provided government funding to both the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroad companies to help build the Transcontinental Railroad and telegraph lines. This affected big business by showing the government was willing to give funding to businesses and allowing them to work on the said railroad as they pleased. It has also provided land to these businesses that the companies used to accumulate wealth. For labor unions, especially the workers, it provided poor working conditions as the businesses were able to roam as they please.
Okay, what are some pros and or cons of how this shaped your group's circumstances at this point?
Well, for the Chinese Exclusion Act, there wasn't really any pros, and the cons were that it barred entrance to Chinese immigrants, and it supported the discriminatory ideas that existed before this.
For me, Mexicans at this time benefited from the amount of work that was available for them and economic opportunities, which opened migration pathways into the United States. However, they faced harsh working conditions and as well as racism and limited political and social rights.
Well, for big businesses especially, there were lots of pros, as they used it to accumulate wealth and have a whole overhead on the government. And for labor unions, it was more cons, as they lessened working conditions and had to work long, hard, grueling hours.
I'm gonna work you long and hard.
Cut that out.
What the fuck, dude?
Oh,
No,
alright.
actually, cause
No, I need.
Okay.
Actually, no, I'm ready. No, wait, I was
Hold on.
gonna stop recording anyways.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna give you like an alley-oop because we're both doing the Immigration Act of 1917.
What does that mean?
We're both. It also affected Asians.
for the progressive era.
Number
Type 67. Oh, 552. Alright. Today I'll be focusing on labor unions and big businesses and how from the 20th century to the present, how both the economy and each other have influenced how the other either grows or shrinks.
So we should all go around and define our group that we're focusing on. I'm focusing on immigration between the United States and Mexico for Mexican immigrants.
There's an easy way to define Asian Americans. Asian encompasses too many cultures to generalize under the term Asian American. The government defines Asian as coming from the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, but this definition doesn't include Central Asians. For the purposes of this podcast, I'll just be focusing on whatever I could find about any of those groups, but there hasn't been anything on. We gotta redo this.
I didn't write anything about.
An easy way to define Asian Americans. Asia encompasses too many cultures to generalize under the term Asian American. The government defines them as coming from the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, which notably does not contain Central America. So in general, I'll be talking about really whatever pertains to those four groups, including Central. Well, there's not really anything on them.
Well, for labor unions and big businesses, it's kind of self-explanatory. The formation of unions.
I
You wouldn't do that?
want to redo that.
Okay,
redo it.
go pause it.
It's just take 52. And pros, for labor unions, obviously they became legal, and strikes and boycotts were legal under federal law, allowing them to demand for better workplace conditions and pay and such and such. And for cons, businesses, they lost trusts, and they lost one of their most unfair and most successful
Just continue.
I forgot the wording. Let me restart that.
Okay.
My phone flashing at me.
Okay.
The heck, you see that?
Yes.
Oh,
Probably.
For pros and cons, they're pretty much flipped from last time. For pros, labor unions became legal, as well as strikes and boycotts, which allowed them to demand for better working conditions and pay and many other things, as well as creating a fair market that allowed smaller businesses to thrive. And for cons, for big businesses, it made their biggest tactic to gaining and accumulating wealth illegal, or breaking them down into smaller companies, which limited their power overall.
okay. Now, what about the Great Depression and New Deal during the 1930s?
We should start. Hold on, I forgot. I got
Me
this.
start it?
Okay. No. You two should start this one because I'm doing World War II instead. And post World War II for this one.
So I'm going to talk about the reparation campaign and the Mexican reparation campaigns between the periods of 1929 and 1939. The reparation campaign was when the government supported a campaign that pushed for a series of deportation and removal acts during the Great Depression that pressured and forced hundreds of thousands of Mexican Americans out of the country. This affected my group during the Great Depression because many Americans blamed immigrants for unemployment and economic struggles. So because of this, local and federal government targeted Mexican communities by doing this deportation raids similar to ones we have now, and many families were separated, and even U.S. citizens that were just descendants were forced to leave the country.
Well, I'll be doing the Civics Works Administration, which was part of the New Deal. It was a push to create more jobs during the Great Depression, and it took place during the winter, and while short-lived, it gave jobs to over 4 million people. This obviously allowed labor unions to thrive because workers were given more jobs, and big businesses were able to undertake take part in constructions during the winter, which is one of the hardest times of the year.
And I'll be focusing on an event from World War II, actually, because you can't go without mentioning Japanese American internment. It was caused by the United States induction into World War II due to Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. FDR responded by issuing Executive Order 9066, which originally aimed to voluntarily round up Japanese Americans, but they obviously declined, so they forcefully detained Japanese they forcefully relocated Japanese Americans. This directly caused detriments to the lives of these Japanese Americans, and upon their return, they faced further discrimination from those around them. And this connects to my thesis because this is one of the first appearances of a global kind of scare affecting Asian American immigrants.
Alright, and going back to what I was saying, this connects back to my thesis because... Wait, no, I'm not going to say that.
Pros and cons.
Huh?
Pros and cons.
Pros and cons? Okay. I shouldn't connect this to my thesis?
Connected to your thesis.
Well, didn't we already do that?
Do it in a way that you could just splice it in.
The U.S. government used Mexican immigrants as a scapegoat during the Great Depression, despite their important role in the American workforce during the period. This shows how political and economic fear can influence public opinions and end up ignorantly creating false narratives about groups of people, in this case with senseless immigration policies. What are some pros and cons of your guys' groups during this time period?
Well, for mine, pros, there was work, and labor unions thrived because of that, as well as businesses in a time of great strife. But cons, it wasn't really fulfilling work. The pay wasn't great, though 40 million people did do it. There was still a depression happening. So, ultimately, was short-lived.
For my group, it increased awareness of discrimination against Mexican immigrants, and it's an event that has inspired many future civil rights activists within the Mexican American communities. However, this period is when there's a separation of thousands of families are enforced deportation and removals.
And for me, there's only cons. Many Japanese Americans were left homeless, unsupported by society. They came home to find their houses ransacked and sometimes even just sold to someone else.
Alright. What about the Great Society? What's a policy from the Great Society that affected your guys' groups?
For me, I'll talk about an event, major event. It was the Vietnam War. Now, the Vietnam War was a proxy war during the Cold War between the communist North Vietnam and the non-communist South Vietnam. And involvement in what was essentially, but not technically, a war with Vietnam led to Vietnamese Americans and even other Asian Americans facing increased discrimination. This is another scare that kind of caused discrimination against Asian Americans. And even though the threat of communism was the main concern during this time, the goal of the war was not really clear. So this okay, I'm gonna restart.
It's my thumb.
Stop it. Okay.
I'm moving my thumb now, I'm moving the skin. Or I can do.
Yo, please.
Sorry. Okay.
Reintroduce the era.
Wait, go turn the camera on and off, please.
You mean off and on?
It's whatever. My head hurts
This is
so
tape
bad.
700
My head hurts so
and
bad.
25.
Okay. Alright, let's talk about the Great Society and how that era has affected your guys' groups.
Alright. I'll start. The Vietnam War happened during this period, and the Vietnam War was a proxy war during the Cold War, which was between the Communist North and non-Communist South Vietnam. Involvement in what was essentially a war with Vietnam led to Vietnamese Americans and other Asian Americans even facing discrimination. Even though the threat of communism was the main concern during this war, this was another scare causing discrimination against Asian Americans. This was a consequence of the Red Scare in this case. This set back progress for Asian Americans towards acceptance, just how World War II led to internment.
Alright, I'm going to talk about the United Farm Workers Movement that happened between the period of 1962 and 1970s. The United Farm Workers Movement was a labor rights movement led by farm workers and activists, including Cesar Chavez, that fought for better wages, safer working conditions, and fair treatment for agricultural workers. This affected my group because it
Could start to face the same characteristic, or that Asians could start to face the same circumstances that Latinos face under the current administration.
So Dominican Papi.
Damien.
Whoa, we're fucking in here. Yo, we fucking in here.
Flip the thing around so we can see what you look like. Dumbo, bro.
No. Is it against the podcast rules to eat an orange during the podcast?
I don't know what the podcast. There's no podcast rules.
We made this podcast. We made the rules. Yeah, if Donald's allowed to have relationships with middle schoolers, I'm allowed to have eat an orange.
Oh,
Because the entire podcast.
other Dylan. Okay.
Same with Will.
Yeah, no, actually, Bald Dylan, he had a relationship with Marina. That's when he said.
Why do Dylan's like underclassmen? Have you thought about that?
Just the one Dylan.
No, Dylan Reyes.
No.
Lex is a sophomore.
I mean, that one's fine because it's a year.
I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
if the years if the years and grades touch, it's okay.
I'm just saying why they like the underclassmen. I've never been with the underclassmen.
Your name's not Dylan.
It's because they're family friends.
So it's like incest.
No. No.
Family friends and family members are two different things. Why are Wills weird?
What?
Why are Wills weird?
Who? Oh, Will. Yeah, you're right. Why are Wills weird? Why are white Wills weird?
We have
How many
Professor
white
Wilson,
Wills?
William Wilson. He's
Woodrow Wilson?
Bill Jones. And then we have William Scott Dustin.
Will Smith?
He's basically white. They made him white.
Will Smith. Yeah, he's very gentrified.
And then Jaden Smith is just like completely white born. Like they made
Have
Will
you seen-
Smith like transition and then Jaden Smith just like is. That's
We-
why he fucked with Tyler.
We're on
Perry,
modern
whatever.
presidency now, right?
No.
We never did our pros and cons.
Oh, okay.
Pros and cons of the conservative revival.
Alright,
Hold on. Mine's not loading.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, veto the family medically back.
Alright. So what are some pros and cons for your guys' groups in this era?
Well, I can go first. Pros is that businesses were able to spend less money on workers by not having to pay for medical and family leave. And cons is, well, they didn't have to pay for family and medical leave. So lots of workers got injured.
Well, pros were that Asian Americans were finally getting reparations, and there was a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing on the government's behalf. But there's a one huge con, and that's the speed at which it took the government to enact these policies. The Civil Liberties Act took 10 years and hard, laboring for by Japanese Americans to get. And this is pretty recent, so it still probably persists today.
Yeah. Some pros for my group is that millions of immigrants were able to gain legal status that in turn increased access to jobs, education, and economic growth. However, the increased border enforcement and continued political division over immigration became more of an issue that was bringing the country apart. Alright, so let's choose from some modern presidencies. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump from his first
Talking about him.
Anybody have a
first
filter?
administration and
Yo, turn it towards us so you can see what's on yours.
what?
No.
Let me say that again. Alright, so let's choose two modern presidencies and talk about how their policies have affected our groups. Between Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump from his first administration, and Joe Biden. I personally chose Barack Obama and Donald Trump.
I chose Bill Clinton and Barack Obama.
I chose George W. Bush and Donald Trump.
Alright, the first policy I want to talk about that Obama introduced was DACA, or what?
No, sorry, I was going next. I was doing Obama.
It's like he has the earliest ones, I have the next one. And then
Alright, fine. You will start.
Alright. Well, first I'll go with a fuck. First, I'll start with an act passed by Obama in 2010, the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act was an act that was meant to expand the availability of health care to those of lower classes and gave employees better health benefits and encouraged business employers to give health insurance as well as overtime. This affected my group by making businesses provide health care and by giving all employees benefits, not just full-time ones. This helped labor unions by allowing them to further help support their workers and by giving them more leverage to demand more rights.
Alright. So the first event happened during Bush's administration, and it was the shooting death of Fong Li. It happened on July 22nd of 2006. Fong Li was a Hmong immigrant from Laos who was shot by a police officer in Minneapolis for allegedly raising a gun at the officer. The records showed that no evidence of Li handling the gun, and that the gun was in possession of the police for a former burglary case before. The officer was ruled to not have used excessive force, which led to protests and rallies in St. Paul. And he was also given a Medal of Valor for his actions. And this shows the racism that exists within communities against Asian Americans through one of the ways that racism is commonly enacted in a violent manner against many minorities. And this connects to my thesis because despite all of the policies and events that have progressed the cause of discrimination against Asian Americans, police violence goes unchecked for Asian Americans and even other minorities.
Alright. The policy. Sorry.
And my second event is the COVID-19 pandemic, and specifically Trump's Chinese virus tweet. And COVID-19 pandemic started during December 2019 and lasted until around 2022 and 2023, which it died down. And Donald Trump tweeted a few days after it was declared a pandemic. In a tweet, he called the coronavirus the Chinese virus. This later became a widespread term, and this tweet coincides with rising hate against Asian Americans and tensions against China. And this spurred discrimination against Asian Americans. This connects to my thesis because similar to Japanese internment as a result of World War II and the discrimination against the Vietnamese as a result of the Red Scare, the Vietnam War, the COVID-19 outbreak led to increasing hate against Chinese people. The pattern of global scares creating discrimination has not stopped.
Alright.
Well, I forgot to talk about my second one, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was 1993 by Bill Clinton. It was a trade pact between all the North American countries, Mexico, Canada, and the U.S., and it expanded trade and boosted the economy in America, especially with the need to export more goods, more jobs opened, and businesses thrived. This allowed for more work to be given to workers, which increased the responsibilities of labor unions, and with other things going on, businesses obviously made a lot more money, and some even treated their workers better due to this. And it helped increase relations with other countries.
Alright. The first policy I want to talk about is from 2012 when Obama introduced the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So DACA was an immigration policy created under Barack Obama that provided temporary protection from deportation for undocumented immigrants who were brought to the United States. This affected my group because it gave many young Mexican immigrants opportunities to work legally, attend school, and live in the United States without immediate fear of deportation. Obama passing DACA showed how political leaders could respond to growing public awareness in immigrant communities and their struggles.
Oh, I don't know.
Did you do pros and cons?
No.
Okay. And then the second policy I want to talk about is under Donald Trump's administration, which is the zero tolerance immigration policy. So, complete polar opposite of Obama's. From 2018, under Donald Trump, the administration introduced tons of stricter immigration enforcement policies that led to family separations at the border, U.S.-Mexico border. This affected my group. This policy showed the growing political attack on immigration in the United States. Yeah. I just realized I wrote something there. Oops. It's okay.
Amari McNair and Eileen Trujano, please report to the front office. Eileen Trujano to the front office.
Alright. What are some pros and cons of your guys' policies?
Well,
Or events?
Bill Clinton's North American Free Trade Agreement The pros are obviously it helped boost the economy heavily, as well as getting work for many employees. And for cons, it did strain the relationship from employer to employee, but it was very minute. And for the Affordable Care Act, of course, pros, it increased the availability of health care, meaning less workplace accidents and less financial strain on employees. And cons, well, employers had to pay for this health insurance, which then lowered the amount they would be making.
Alright, pros and cons of the shooting death family. There's only one pro, and that it provides a clear view of what happens in these situations. And there's a very important con, and it's that police violence like this got normalized and rewarded. There was a Medal of Valor given to the officer, and that's a huge con. And for the COVID-19 pandemic, well, there's not really much pros about the situation, and the cons is that the public, or the president, just publicly tweeted a racist statement and spread it, essentially, causing Asian American hate. And that just was allowed to happen.
Alright. Some pros of DACA were that it created many educational and employment opportunities that were previously not available. It also created protection for deportation for any dreamers and increased political participation with immigrant youth. Some cons. The protection were only temporary, so there was a continued uncertainty about immigration reform. And then for the zero tolerance immigration policy, the pros. It was argued that it strained border enforcement and national security, but that could be a pro or con. And cons being they separated more families, increased fear within immigrant communities, and created greater political polarization over immigrant issues. Alright. Is this your conclusion?
Yeah.
Alright. Now, let's conclude everything that all the topics we just talked about. You're welcome to go first.
Well, for me, currently in present day, labor unions have been seeing a rising public influence as more people are demanding for more rights, and as the government currently is in support of big businesses and in use of supporting them with examples such as lobbying. Comparing that to before, where labor unions were publicly not seen as useful or needed. On the other hand, big businesses have seen a huge boom, especially in the tech field. With new technology coming out, businesses have been growing and merging more than ever. Pros of this, the economy, well, at least right now, due to all external conflicts, has been going up and down. But these businesses are continuing to accumulate wealth and monopolizing every market they can. And for pros of labor unions, more strikes are happening along with boycotts, meaning more action is being taken relatively. As well as population density as more awareness is going out. Cons, well, the government currently is siding a lot of the time with these big businesses, allowing for them to run with this please, especially with the use of AI centers.
Continue.
Me?
With the Trump administration, it's better to just do it.
Under the second Trump administration, I think that we will again see this huge boom in private business wealth accumulation, as Trump himself is a private businessman owning many businesses. And we've already seen this happening. He makes decisions that, again, cut taxes for the rich and helps increase the wage gap from the lowest to the richest. As well, I think labor unions will again not see funding or support from the government. While there may be people who would support and fund the government, I think it is very few in between, And overall, I think, again, we will see this huge increase of public support as the people are going to be suffering from the huge wage gap, but the government will overall support the big businesses.
Alright. So yeah, today Mexican immigrants have the biggest influence in American politics compared to the early 1900s. Political debates regarding immigration has been a topic very prevalent in our current political era, and this group of people who have had to face a large battle within the country to claim their rights as citizens in a society where there's a lot of false narratives directed at them. Currently, the community has been strong in activism as a way to work on changing the conversations in the government regarding labor rights and immigration policy. So some pros of this group circumstance. Wait, did you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. Some pros of this group circumstances would be that in today's era, is compared to before that they have more political representation and voting power. There's branches of laws that focus primarily on defending immigrants and their civil rights. There's also more access to better educations and jobs. Cons, there's still a large amount of racism and discrimination intertwined in our society that go against immigration. Immigration laws and deportation policies are also continue to create fear for families that they've been separated. And then how might this change in the second Trump administration? During the current Trump administration, there have been heavier and strict immigration laws being pushed, as well as even more deportation and even more border enforcement than there was in the first administration. Immigration continues to be one of the biggest dividers in politics, and it directly affects Mexican immigrant communities. Some pros of the administration: it has tightened national security and created a stronger border control, but has also not benefited immigrants whatsoever.
In the modern day, the community of Asian Americans stand out as a diverse community, which has been united through the discrimination that each group has faced, from the grouping of Asians, such as in the early immigration acts, to focused instances of racism in internment camps, proxy wars with the coronavirus. And though this unity has brought numerous changes in policy, not everything has been covered by law, and public opinion still shows signs of racism. Some pros of this group's circumstance, compared to before, are that Asian Americans can be considered citizens, they're allowed to immigrate into the country, and there exists the united cultural identity which connects Asian Americans in their struggles. Cons of this circumstance are that racism has become normalized, the patterns which cause discrimination to spread have not been acknowledged or addressed, major government officials are openly promoting racist ideas without major backlash. And this connects to the second Trump administration in that Trump has already established one president for racism towards Asian Americans and is openly anti-immigration. And I don't see any pros, but cons would be that Asians